So from 1982 to 1993, there was a popular program on primetime television, a situation comedy, set in a bar at the foot of Beacon Hill in Boston, just down the street from what used to be the headquarters of Unitarian Universalism. And on the TV show, they had a theme song that began each show. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. Now, of course, we want that in our church, right? Just imagine you walk in on Sunday morning and someone says, "Hi, Roger. Good to see you again. Welcome." Except, think about it. In order for everyone to know your name, how big can that church be? Give a guess. 30 people? Maybe 35, maybe 40. So most of you would have to leave in order to create that kind of church. That's not what I'm advocating this morning. The virus has been hard on church communities. In a study conducted last August, clergy of all denominations reported that worship service attendance was at 85% of pre-pandemic levels. They had lost, churches on average, about 15% of their congregations. And like congregations everywhere, here in media, we are in a time of rebuilding our religious community. We need to see old friends, and we love to make new friends. While the Sunday worship service is the glue that holds the church together, making friends during a worship service is not easy. The coffee hour after the service is a good place to briefly reconnect with old friends. But starting a friendship in coffee hour, that's not easy either, especially if you're new to the church or you're an introvert. I know when I visit a church just as a guest, I tend to read the notice board more than I tend to talk to people. We are most likely to make friends when we join a small group within the larger church. And I first experienced this in my life when I was a teenager. It was the high school youth group in the church where I made my friends. I wanted to go to church. I wanted to go every Sunday, not to miss a Sunday. And it wasn't to hear the sermon, but to be with my friends in the youth group. And some of those friendships have lasted a lifetime. Later, when I became a minister, I experienced many small groups. In the first church that I served in Lexington, Kentucky, it was the Friday night volleyball group. In the spring, the summer, and the fall, every Friday, we would gather on the church grounds. A member of the congregation would get out a lawnmower and mow the grass so it created a volleyball court. We set up the net and we played until it got too dark to see. Children would play on the church grounds while their parents played volleyball. Members with homes would volunteer to be the host to an after volleyball game social gathering at their house, generally a different house each week. And in the winter, we used an indoor volleyball court at the University of Kentucky. These Unitarian Universalist volleyball players, they knew and they cared for each other. Once I did a wedding before the game and had several glasses of white wine, and then sprained my foot for some reason, jumping up to catch the ball. And they were all so nice to me, caring for me afterwards. But I don't recommend mixing wine and volleyball. Another group in that church where friendships were strong was the women's group. Now, not being a woman, they did not invite me to attend. But the group would have retreats at state parks at least once a year. They'd get maybe 30, this is a church of about 150 people. I'd get maybe 70 on Sunday morning, but the women's group had about 30 women in it. And they would go on these retreats at the Kentucky state parks, and they would come back with recommendations for sermon topics for me. Around that time, I went to a continuing education conference for ministers. In the 1980s, the early 1980s, a Dutch Reformed minister named Robert Schuller preached a self-help message, which he called possibility thinking. He drew 10,000 people each week to services at his spectacular Crystal Cathedral in Southern California. Tens of millions around the world watched his TV program, The Hour of Power. Now, the church consultant who was leading this conference said that when Robert Schuller died or retired, the church would decline. This would happen, he explained, because the church was built around the charismatic personality of one person, the minister, and not built around healthy small group life. Robert Schuller retired in 2006. 4 years later, 2010, the church went bankrupt. The building was sold to the Roman Catholics. I learned that healthy, growing communities of various sizes, religious communities, are not built around the personality of one person. Ministers, some of you may have noticed, ministers come and go. What keeps churches healthy are small groups, many small groups. I heard the story of a denomination. This is not Unitarian Universalists, but they decided to establish new churches in growing communities by starting gatherings in people's homes. This was back in the 1960s. Cities like Dallas and Houston and Phoenix, they were growing rapidly. The church planners started by having people meet on Sunday morning in their homes in the suburbs. The homes were small, so they could only hold maybe 10 or 15 adults and their children in the living room. They would sit together in their living rooms, and they would have a script, they would have a small religious service. Eventually, the denominational organizers created enough of these small home groups in a particular geographic area that they could bring all these people together into one new church. They could build a building, and everybody in these small groups could gather. Now, one task of the new minister was to integrate these small groups, these little groups, into one community where people all got together and knew each other. Some ministers were very successful at this, and they were praised by the denomination for their skill. They got people to think of themselves as one community. The individual small groups became one happy family. Other ministers were not so successful. No matter how hard they tried, people still connected primarily with that original small group that they had been part of when the church started. These church members did not feel like they were part of one happy family. Ironically, however, the churches where the ministers were successful in integrating the groups together stayed the same size. The churches where the ministers had failed, where they had been unable to assimilate the small groups into one community, where people came to services but tended to sit in the sanctuary with their friends from that small group, these churches continued to grow in membership. Small groups are places where new people can find a home within the larger church. The more small groups you have, the more places you have to bring new people into your church. Now, these healthy small groups, they can take many forms. Martin Luther King Sr., the father of the famous minister, Martin Luther King Sr., he organized his Atlanta congregation around birthdays. For example, everyone born in January was called to a meeting and told that it was their responsibility, having been born in January, to plan a special event for the entire congregation to take place during January. Everyone born in February was given the same assignment, as were all the people born in March, in April, in May, and so on, creating 12 multi-generational small groups within the larger church, given a task to work together on. Well, as I say, healthy groups can take many forms. In my Bethesda church, a group of retired persons started a weekly discussion group, meeting from 10 a.m. to noon every Monday, and they called it Science and Religion, the Science and Religion group. One person would agree to make a presentation on a topic for about 15 minutes, and then a discussion would follow this presentation. Many of these persons had worked for years in places like the National Institute of Health or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which was just down the street. However, it turned out they weren't just in their heads. They weren't just intellectuals. When one of them became ill, they were there with calls, with visits, with casseroles. When a longtime member of the group died, they came as a group to the memorial service. A colleague in San Diego, Tom Olentow, told me about his success in starting men's groups in his church. So I suggested it in Bethesda. 8 men started to meet twice a month on Saturday mornings. Now, this turned out to be a big success for them, and that group continued for years, with the men eventually cooking a meal for their partners at a special gathering. Now, I need to also say that not all efforts to start small groups are successful. In Bethesda, I led what we called an aging support group. About 12 of us met twice a month on Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 4. Each time we would gather, we would go in a circle and people would check in about their lives, and then we would talk about issues raised in the check-in. Things like, when we go to the shopping mall, we can never find our car when we leave. Or where can we get the best hearing aids? Things like that. After several months, the group disbanded. The friendships just didn't gel with that particular group of people. After the group disbanded, I put a notice in the church newsletter that I was starting a new aging support group. Only one person from the old group returned. The new group gelled and met for years. That's how it is with small groups in churches. Some of them work out. Sometimes the connections are made, but not always. I took a sabbatical and became the guest minister in Adelaide, Australia, and I joined the church bushwalk group. Every 2 weeks on Saturday, we would go for a hike. We carried our lunches with us. We would walk in a day for about 10 miles, encountering wild kangaroos, emus, and occasionally a koala bear. These people who walked together twice a month on Saturday morning, they became good friends. The Adelaide Unitarians also had a Christian Unitarian discussion group. About 10 people in that church, and there were only about 110 members, about 10 people in that church met after services about once a month for a special conversation about being a Unitarian and also identifying themselves as Christian. The way people in that group supported each other impressed me. They were happy, liberal Christians, accepted and supported within a larger humanist congregation. Then I took a sabbatical and became a guest minister in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the Unitarians there, they had a small group of Buddhist meditators. It met at lunchtime every Tuesday in the church sanctuary, where they would meditate together as a group. This was important and meaningful to them. Then I moved to a church in Sarasota, Florida, and there they had a movie discussion group. The leader would pick out a movie that was showing in a local theater that month. People would go see the movie on their own and then gather at church to talk about it. A popular movie discussion could draw about 30 people to talk. I actually teamed up with a group of people. There were about 6 of us, and we would all go see the movie together and then go to a good restaurant afterwards. And it became the group that I was closest to in that church. Many of these small groups that I have described can meet on Zoom if the virus surges again. However, as we learn to trust vaccinations, gathering in homes to eat together can be a popular small group activity. Now, many Unitarian Universalist congregations have what they call circle suppers, also called dinner discussion groups or small group dinners. Members who are interested in signing up, and they sign up, and an organizer creates guest lists for September through May dinners. That usually starts in the fall, but you can start at any time of the year. And are we going to start one here at this church? Why don't you use the microphone? Thank you, Lori.
Good morning. So keep your eyes open for an announcement that we're going to be sending out in mid-February, where we're going to pilot our own circle suppers, and we're going to try to get 2 or 3 in before the end of the church year. And so there's going to be lots of information. These are going to be, voluntary, sort of fun activities that are just social, no church. It's actually going to be like a non-church discussion for the evening, and one person will host, and we'll send lots of information out, and people will hopefully sign up, and you'll be randomly assigned to different people throughout the year, so it's not going to be the same group of people all the time. So keep your eyes open for that announcement. Thank you.
Thank you. And some of these churches have a rule saying we will not discuss church politics while we're eating. On others, I have received letters after the meetings telling me how to be a better minister. So you all are free to create them in whatever way you want. The average church in the United States has lost, as I said, about 15% of its members in the last 3 years due to COVID. Like religious institutions around the world, we in this church are in a time of rebuilding. If we wish to rebuild community while living with COVID, the healthier small groups we have, the more healthy small groups we have, the more likely it is that we will attract new members and sometimes bring back folks who have drifted away. As you can see by my examples, you can create healthy small groups in many ways. Most of these groups start not with the minister, but with a church member who gets an idea and is willing to do the work to pull the group together. I hope by describing so many different groups that I have experienced, I will stimulate your imagination, help you see the possibilities. If you have an idea for a small group that you would like to start, you can send me an email and I will do my best to help you. Of course, you already have lots of small groups, and I have in my office, which I forgot to bring the key for, actually a poster with a list of them. But I want to point out that each of our religious education classes is a small group. A class for children is a small group. And I understand we need, if you're looking to lead a small group, we need an assistant to help with the second grade if you're interested. I spoke at the beginning, at the start of the sermon, about the importance of the high school youth group where I was a teenager. And right now, teenagers in this church have the same experience. The success of all of our religious education classes, all of these small groups, is key to rebuilding community as we learn to live with COVID. When a young child comes home from school and says that her best friend has told her that she's going to go to hell when she dies because she's not accepted Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior, the parent is not like to say, "Here, honey, watch this Unitarian Universalist sermon on YouTube." That's not going to happen. The parent is more likely to get her child out of bed on Sunday morning and bring her to this church. Adults without children, some of you qualify for this, adults without children might choose to sleep in on Sunday morning or watch the service on Zoom. But a parent with an inquiring child, they're going to come to church. You are all doing an excellent job supporting your religious education program, and I congratulate you and encourage you to keep up the good work. Another small group within the church is the choir. In church choirs, people bond together. They develop friendships from singing together. It's a small group that meets usually twice a week, once for the rehearsal on Thursday night and once for Sunday morning. And the more frequently you meet, the faster you develop those friendships. The choir can help rebuild this church, and I know that Robert would love to have more members in the choir. Then we have another way in which we have organized small groups within this church called Soul Matters, a program created a few years ago by a minister in New York State, Reverend Scott Taylor. The Soul Matters Sharing Circle is a network of Unitarian Universalist congregations who follow the same monthly themes. Soul Matters offers a small group curriculum with its central goal to foster circles of trust and deep listening. We are one of about 145 Unitarian Universalist churches that participate in Soul Matters. Now, right now, we have limited spaces for folks to join one of our Soul Matters spiritual exploration groups. However, if we get enough people to sign up at the same time, we may be able to create a new group. We also look forward to people who may be interested in facilitating a group. To receive the monthly theme packet by email or for Soul Matters related questions, or email our Soul Matters coordinators, and there on the screen you see the information. During our brief coffee hour after the service, Ruth, are you here? Yes. Ruth will have information in the fellowship hall, correct? All right. All right, great. If you have questions and you want to join Soul Matters. Finally, I want to close with I hope, humorous story about our need for community. A rabbi was, I guess, we clergy get this way sometimes. A rabbi was just fed up with his congregation. He decided to skip the Sunday morning service, assign the work to an assistant rabbi or a shamus, and instead he decided to go to instead of going to the temple, he decided to call in sick and go out and play golf, a game he loved to play. Now, Moses was looking down from heaven, and he saw the rabbi on the golf course. when he should have been at the temple leading the service. Moses, of course, naturally reported this to God. Moses suggested God needed to punish the rabbi severely. As he watched, Moses saw the rabbi playing the best golf game he had ever played. The rabbi got a hole-in-one on one of the toughest holes of the course, a hole-in-one. Moses turned to God and said, "I thought you were going to punish him. Do you call this punishment?" And God replied, "Who can he tell?" Let's sing our closing hymn.